2018 was supposed to be the year that dreams of self-driving cars became a reality. While car companies continue to unveil new driverless concepts, those predictions of a truly autonomous vehicle may be a lot further away than we think. Tim Stevens is editor-in-chief of the automotive website Roadshow at our partner CNET. Tim, good morning.
Good morning.
But Tesla and Google both said this is the year. But it isn't.
Well, it might be for Google. Waymo's self-driving technology is expected to be available in the Phoenix area this year. So if you happen to live there, you might actually be living in the future before the end of the year. But for those of us who live elsewhere, we still got a little while to wait, unfortunately. And Tesla, yeah, absolutely, we still have a while to wait there, too.
Why is that?
Ultimately, the technology is almost ready at this point. The sensors are there, and a lot of the supercomputing power that you need is almost developed as well. But they really need more testing, and they really need the cost of this stuff to come down. Those sensors are still very expensive, and the supercomputers that you need in the trunk to process all the data, those are pretty pricey, too, to the point where people really wouldn't be able to afford this technology, even if it were available.
So for Waymo, you say the technology is there. What about the regulation, though?
The regulation is definitely one of the bigger roadblocks that's stopping this sort of development right now. Phoenix is kind of a hotbed for testing because there's very little legislation in that area, which means companies can kind of do whatever they want to. Elsewhere in the U.S., though, it's much more difficult, and there are no laws in place that will allow that kind of testing to enable the companies to really take the steps forward that they need to do so.
Well, okay, so if the tech is there, the regulatory infrastructure is developing, why do we keep seeing these high-profile crashes of these automotive self-driving cars?
There have been very few crashes, actually, if you look at the number of miles that these cars are covering. Waymo, in particular, the former Google self-driving car project, has covered millions and millions of miles with very few incidents. And those crashes that they have had have been actually the fault of other drivers. So actually, these cars are proving to be more safe than human drivers. But of course, whenever there is a crash, we have so much more data about those crashes that we can really examine them in a lot of minutia.
Okay. We talked about legislation, Tim. What about the insurance industry being ready for this change?
It's definitely a big concern for insurers, of course, because these cars are expected to be much more safer, of course, but there's a lot of questions about who is liable in a crash, and ultimately, will you even need insurance? Right now, of course, you certainly will, because laws in every state require that kind of thing. But going forward, we may see a different sort of approach to buying cars, where actually you buy into a car access program, and insurance is kind of baked into that. We're beginning to see things like that already. Volvo, for example, has a program called Care by Volvo, where you don't buy a car, you pay a given amount per month, and you get a car, plus insurance and everything else that you need.
It's interesting. I interviewed the CEO of Uber a couple of months ago, and they were introducing their driving taxis. And so I'm curious as to, while these companies are developing the technology, the demand is not quite there yet. So what do they see that consumers don't see?
Yeah, in fact, there's not only demand, there's actually fear. We see study after study that shows that Americans are afraid of this technology, that they don't want cars to drive themselves. But the belief is that they'll be so practical, so convenient, and so safe that ultimately people will begin to change their minds. And for a company like Uber, they spend most of their money on the salaries of drivers. So if they can actually take that person out of the car, they not only get a lot cheaper, but they get rid of a lot of the risks that they've had with background checks and things like that. Some of the bigger problems that they faced suddenly all go away.
Well, I mean, it's hugely disruptive for the labor industry, too, right?
Certainly.
Those are all jobs.
If you
replace them with robots, self-driving cars, that changes how people are making a dollar.
Absolutely does.
Tim Stevens, thanks for that.
Thank you.